Okay, so get this. Imagine a rocket, but instead of blasting off into space, it lands back where it started.
Like a skyscraper deciding it wants to park itself back on its construction site.
Exactly. That's kind of what SpaceX just did, and it's honestly even wilder than it sounds.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
We're diving deep into SpaceX's latest Starship launch in this deep dive.
We'll break down not just what happened, but what it means for, the future of space travel.
Because let's face it, getting humans to Mars seems to be the end goal here.
Yeah, that's the dream, right?
We've got a ton of sources for this deep dive. First-hand accounts from the SpaceX team, technical breakdowns that'll make your head spin, and even some reactions from, well, let's just say very enthusiastic space fans.
It's been pretty amazing to see how SpaceX has basically single-handedly changed how we think about space travel.
And the economics of it all.
Right. It's not just about the engineering anymore. It's about making space, well, more accessible, something we've never really seen before.
And they're doing it with, like, serious style, too. I mean, some of the quotes we found from Mission Control are just priceless. Things like, "This is absolutely insane."
You don't usually hear that kind of excitement from, engineers.
It's infectious, though, right?
It really is. This wasn't just another routine test. You could really feel the significance of this whole achievement in their reactions.
So walk us through it. Why is everyone freaking out?
Well, to understand that, we kind of need to break down the tech a bit, talk about the Starship system. It's got two main parts. First, you've got the super heavy booster. That's the giant first stage.
The big one, right?
Right. And then on top of that, you've got Starship itself, which is the smaller spacecraft designed to actually go into orbit.
So it's like a 2-in-1 spaceship situation.
Essentially.
And this time they managed to land the booster, the big one, back on Earth in one piece.
They did.
Tell me they at least used a parachute.
Not even close. They landed it upright, right on the landing pad, using those Raptor engines we always hear about.
No.
Yeah, they basically controlled its fall from space.
Wow. How?
Well, and get this. They used those massive robotic arms, nicknamed Mechazilla, to help catch it as it came down.
Mechazilla. Seriously.
SpaceX, they got to have their fun.
I mean, it's a pretty epic name, I'll give them that. But what do they do?
Imagine chopsticks, but for, like, a 23-story building coming down from orbit.
Okay, now I'm getting flashbacks to that claw machine game at the arcade, except the stakes are just slightly higher this time.
Just a bit. But seriously, why go through all that trouble? Why not just let the booster splash down in the ocean like they used to?
Yeah, it seems a lot simpler.
It's all about reusability. Think about it. What if you had to throw away your car after every road trip?
That'd be a nightmare. And super expensive.
Exactly. And that's what traditional rockets are like. Use once, then they become expensive space junk. But if you can land a rocket and use it again, well, that changes everything.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. Cheaper rockets, which means more launches, more missions, just more possibilities all around.
Exactly. And that's where, Elon Musk and his Mars obsession come in. He's not just interested in quick trips to space. He wants to build a permanent human presence on Mars.
Which is ambitious, to say the least.
To pull that off, spaceflight needs to become a lot more affordable and sustainable.
So reusable rockets are the key to making that happen.
They're a huge part of it, yes. This landing wasn't just about sticking the landing. It was about proving that rapid reusability is actually possible. And that could make space travel more like catching a flight than, launching a rocket.
That's a pretty amazing thought. All right, so reusable rockets mean cheaper space flight, which could then lead to Mars colonization. It all sounds amazing in theory, but how does this even work in practice?
Yeah, it's not exactly intuitive.
It's not like they just hit a giant rewind button on the booster, right?
You'd be surprised. It's kind of like that, just with a bit more math involved.
Yeah.
So after the super heavy booster separates from Starship, it uses those Raptor engines.
The ones you mentioned earlier.
Right, those ones. It uses those to carefully flip itself around and then fly back towards the launch site.
Wait, so it's not just falling back to Earth, it's actively flying itself back? That's insane.
Pretty much.
But what about those giant chopsticks, the Mechazilla arms? What's their role in all of this?
That's the grand finale. As the booster is coming in for a landing, Mechazilla swings into action, and its guidance system tracks every single move the booster makes.
I can't even imagine trying to program something like that.
Oh, it's incredibly complex.
So the goal is to catch the booster, right?
Right, but softly, with just the right amount of force to stabilize it.
What happens if something goes wrong, though? Like, what if they miss the catch? Do they just cross their fingers and hope for the best?
That's the cool thing about how SpaceX operates. They always have a backup plan. Remember those Raptor engines?
Yeah.
If Mechazilla misses, The booster can use them to perform a controlled landing in the ocean instead.
So it's like a built-in safety net.
Exactly.
So either way, they don't lose the booster. Talk about a win-win. You mentioned earlier that reusable rockets could make spaceflight cheaper, but do we have any numbers on that? Like, how much cheaper are we talking?
It's hard to say for sure, but some experts estimate that reusable rockets could reduce the cost of launches by like tenfold, maybe even more down the line.
Tenfold. That's like finding a $20 bill every time you do laundry.
It's a game changer for sure.
Suddenly sending stuff to space becomes a lot more appealing.
Exactly. And it's not even just about the cost. Reusability means you can launch more frequently too. Imagine being able to send missions to Mars every couple of years instead of waiting decades.
It opens up so many more possibilities for research, resource exploration, and for eventually building a self-sustaining colony. Okay, hold on. I need to process this for a second. We're talking about completely changing how we think about space exploration. This launch wasn't just about the super heavy booster, though, was it? Our sources mentioned something about the Starship upper stage, too, right? What happened to that after it separated from the booster?
You're right. While everyone was busy watching the booster make its grand entrance, the Starship upper stage was busy achieving its own milestones.
I mean, talk about stealing the show.
Right. But that's the part that actually carries the crew and cargo. And it successfully completed an orbit around Earth before splashing down in the Indian Ocean.
So even though they weren't planning on recovering the Starship's upper stage this time, it still nailed its mission.
It did, which is a pretty big deal. It lets them collect valuable data for future missions.
And it kind of just shows how committed SpaceX is to this whole testing and iterating approach.
Definitely. They're not afraid to learn from both their successes and their setbacks.
They're like, we're going to figure this out one launch at a time.
Yeah.
Speaking of figuring things out, this whole Starship project isn't just about Mars, is it? I swear I read something about NASA being involved too.
You're right. SpaceX isn't just focused on Mars. They're also playing a key role in NASA's Artemis program.
Artemis, remind me what that is again.
That's the program to put humans back on the moon.
Oh, right, of course.
SpaceX actually has a contract to develop a lunar lander version of Starship for the Artemis 3 mission.
Hold on, so this same technology that could take us to Mars could help us reestablish a human presence on the moon.
It could, yeah.
That's incredible. It feels like we're on the verge of a whole new era of space exploration.
It's definitely an exciting time.
But with any new frontier, there are bound to be challenges. What are some of the hurdles SpaceX might encounter on this, ambitious journey?
You're absolutely right. There are always challenges. One of the biggest ones SpaceX is dealing with right now is regulatory approval. Specifically, they've been going back and forth with the Federal Aviation Administration.
The FAA?
Yeah, the FAA here in the United States.
Ah, yes, the FAA, Guardians of the Sky. What's the holdup? So SpaceX is basically stuck in a bureaucratic black hole with the FAA. What's the issue? Safety concerns or something more?
It's a bit of both, really. Safety is obviously a big deal, especially with these massive rockets.
Right, of course.
The FAA has to make sure these launches aren't risky, for people on the ground or anything. But SpaceX hasn't exactly been quiet about what they see as, way too much red tape.
Yeah, I was going to say.
They're saying these FAA regulations are basically holding back progress, especially in the space industry.
It's like that classic clash, right? Fast-moving innovators versus the kind of slower pace of government.
Exactly.
I guess it comes with the territory when you're pushing boundaries like this.
It definitely does.
But while those two worlds try to find some common ground, let's zoom out a bit.
Okay.
Big picture time. What does this successful Starship test actually tell us about the future of space travel? Is this like the start of a revolution, or are we getting ahead of ourselves?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If, and it's a big if, but if SpaceX can actually make this whole rapid reusability thing work, reliably, affordably, it could completely change the game.
We're talking what, like regular trips to the moon? Lunar bases?
It's not impossible.
Yeah.
Think about it. We could be looking at access to space that was unthinkable just a few years ago.
And then there's Mars. SpaceX wants to send not 1, but 5 Starships to Mars the next chance they get. After this test flight, is that goal even remotely realistic?
It's definitely a step in the right direction. But let's not forget the sheer scale of a Mars mission.
Yeah.
We're talking a 6-month journey, at least.
This way.
Exactly. And you have to carry everything with you, figure out how to land something that massive on another planet.
Oh, yeah. Forgot about that part.
And then, of course, you have to, survive, build a habitat. It's not exactly hospitable.
It's basically trying to kill you, right?
Pretty much. And we haven't even touched on getting back home.
It's mind-boggling. Even with reusable rockets, are we getting ahead of ourselves with all this Mars talk?
It's easy to get swept up in the excitement. But you're right, huge challenges still exist. We've talked tech, logistics, but there's also the human side of things. Can we handle spaceflight that long, physically, mentally? Can we build a self-sustaining environment somewhere with basically no resources?
Big question.
And we're only just starting to scratch the surface.
So yeah, this Starship launch is a huge deal, a massive step forward, but it's still really early in the game of becoming, a multi-planetary species.
Exactly, and that's what's so exciting about all this. It's not just building rockets, it's about pushing ourselves to the limit, our ingenuity, how we work together, and how we see our place in all of this.
Daring to dream big. I like it. Well, that's about all the time we have for this deep dive. But before we go, one last thought. SpaceX wants to send those 5 Starships to Mars, and if they pull it off, what will those missions even look like? What new tech will they need? What will they find? This launch has opened up a universe of possibilities. Keep those questions in mind, and who knows, maybe we'll be doing a deep dive on those Martian adventures sooner than we think. Until then, keep looking up.